I am Lauren from RDU on Stage, and this is the second installment of our Torn conversation, which started last week. And I'm so grateful to Aya and this amazing panel for keeping the conversation going. Um, Before we start, I have to get something off my chest. Last week, I received some feedback from people that people were disappointed in the torn conversation because I didn't bring on, and I'm going to put this one in quotes, the experts to talk about race. What I'm going to tell you is that all of the artists on this panel and all of the incredible artists on the last panel, they are experts in their own lived experience. And that's what we're looking for in these community conversations. So I understand that these conversations are making some people feel uncomfortable. I get that. I'm going to challenge you to take a moment to think to yourself, what about these conversations are making you uncomfortable? Can you be honest with yourself about your own feelings and use this time to self reflect and educate yourself? And if the answer is no, tune out. You don't have to watch. No judgment.
Mm,
So we have the gift of time right now. Let's use this time wisely and not attack one another with this time that we've got. Um, with that said, thank you, Aya, Brian, David, Natalia, Renee, Shonda, and Kenneth. If you have any questions or comments to add to the conversation, put them in the Facebook comments on the RDU on Stage page. So that way I can see them, I can share them with the panel. And Aya, I am going to turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lauren, for that introduction. Hi, everyone. I am Aya Wallace, and I just want to give a few more things that I wrote down. Everything, you're going to see my head go down and up because I took notes. But I just want to let you know that all of you are now in my bonus room. You're sitting on my couches, my chairs, and for those that you can, you're sitting on the floor. We are just talking in hopes to share experiences and our thoughts. Future Torn broadcasts may have more specific themes. For example, parents and raising children, we may cover that. But tonight we are continuing the conversation that we had last week. To those viewing, I hope we can capture and respond to the questions as they come. So there is someone that's looking at the questions and seeing and communicating with us what those questions are. So hopefully we can capture those and answer and respond to those. And I did try and go back and bring some of the questions that we had from last week. So I went through, I think there's 222 comments. So I tried to go through all of those to capture as many questions as I could. So to start, I want the panel to introduce themselves. And like I said, again, I said this to the panel prior to going on. This is a conversation. It's just like we are just talking to each other. So I'm just a facilitator. So you can answer a question, and if anyone feels like they want to answer another question, they can do so. And that's fine. I don't have to be the one that asks and answers all the questions. Okay. But to the panel, I want you to introduce yourself. And like last week, also, there are some questions that Juan posed last week that I'm interested in get more deep into. And one of those that he asked last week was to express how you identify yourself. So introduce yourself, panel, and then along with that introduction, how you identify yourself. We'll start with David. David Robbins.
All right, first up, David Robbins. Hello, everyone and everyone watching. My name is David Robbins. I am a Chicago-based actor. Although I'm based in Chicago, I work regionally. The last production I had the lovely opportunity of doing was Scottsboro Boys with Aya at Theater Raleigh, Raleigh Theater. And I've sort of worked all over. I identify as a Christian Black gay artist. All right, that's a lot. Um, and yeah, that's me.
Thank you, David. We'll go to Natalia.
Hi, my name is Natalia Soto. I identify as an actor, singer, performer, activist, feminist, and mixed woman of color.
Thank you. Kenneth.
My name is Kenneth Hinton, and I'm actually a professor at North Carolina Central University in the theater department. I also have my own theater company called Agape Theater Project, where I'm the artistic director. We're kind of on hold right now, but last season we did Dance on Widows Row, we did Trouble in Mind, and we did the story, At the Water story. And I identify myself as an African American.
Thank you. Brian.
Hi, I'm Brian Westbrook. I've been performing in around this area. I was born and raised in Henderson, just up the road. But I've been performing a lot around here for the past 10 years. I identify as a gay, cis, white male performing artist. And I'm really, really privileged to be here.
Thank you, Brian. I'm sorry, Miss Renee, I had to put the miss in front of there because that's just how we do.
I knew you were gonna, because I've known you since you were a baby. So I'm an old white lady. I don't know. No one's ever asked me how I identify before. I'm an old white lady who loves Jesus and people and telling stories. How's that?
She loves Jesus and telling stories. I didn't know if they got all of that, but yeah.
That's all I got.
White lady loves Jesus and telling stories. And she, Miss Renee, taught at my alma mater in Low Eagles. Whoop, whoop. Okay.
Ooh.
And Sister Shonda.
Why, thank you, Sister Aya. I am Shonda Branch. I'm a theater educator and practitioner. I'm a professional actor, singer, dancer, as well as teacher. I identify as a Black woman.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here and answering that first question. It's been 2 weeks since the murder of George Floyd. Also, your facilitator is a crier, so just understand that. But it's been 2 weeks since the murder of George Floyd, and there has been the sick and tired. We have this term called the sick and shut in, but the sick and tireds decided that they were going to go into the streets and go on media and express that we are sick and tired. And any expression of that occurred. So I want to ask the panel, how are you feeling? It's been 2 weeks. How are you feeling?
I think in this moment, I am happy because I get to see A again. I get to be on this platform. I get to see all these wonderful artists. And I've been asked this question a lot lately, mainly by my white friends and people who, white people I've come in contact with, people I haven't spoken to in years. And my response is the feelings I feel are to be expected, given everything that is going on. I live on the south side of Chicago. And that first weekend of the protests, I was terrified. The first time I can actually say I was scared because the city was being torn apart, and so was my neighborhood. I didn't know what was coming next. There was a Saturday evening, and I did not want to go to sleep because I was hoping no one would come to my home, and I just didn't know what was going on. You could see what was going on in the news as far as looting and how the protests were getting out of hand. I mean, thankfully, we know now a lot of the looting here in Chicago happened where it was caused by people who were not from Chicago. So that's kind of good, kind of bad, you know, kind of good on the hand that like we weren't pillaging our own community, kind of bad on the other hand that people would leave our neighborhood in such a way. But in this moment right now, I'm happy. Overall, I'm weighted.
I am hopeful. I think the country is seeing what we've already seen for a long time. I'm probably the oldest one on this panel. I am the oldest on this panel, but we've seen a lot in our time. And the fact that this happened and was caught on tape, it's not the first time this been on tape and nobody reacted like this. I'm hopeful because everybody's seeing this guy who sits in the White House as who he is. To announce today that he's going to hold a rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma on Juneteenth in a city where 40 square blocks of Black businesses called Black Wall Street was destroyed. It's insane that this man does not have a sympathetic bone in his body. And then this radiates down through the population. So I'm hopeful that we will get this man out of here and get some leadership so we can bring our country back together. And the marching is fine, but there's a pandemic going on. So still, I'm kind of cross about that. We don't want to fill up our hospitals, but at the same time, this conviction has radiated all over the world. And I'm very hopeful that finally we'll get some real change in this country when it comes to change. I mean, this goes back to the 80s when I got a job only because of affirmative action. I was best qualified. The best had already a reputation, degrees, everything, and yet they tried to hire somebody else instead of me. But because of affirmative action, I got the job. But it shouldn't be that way. My record should be looked at against everybody's record. And this is what we're facing in the country today. And hopefully, I feel hopeful that this change can finally happen in 2020, 2021.
Yeah, it's good to see so many people out speaking out who are not Black
people, people of color.
Yeah. And I think that again, I think everyone is just sick and tired. Are there any others? How do you feel?
Yeah, I'll say the word that's really been sticking with me lately is dichotomy, because I feel two emotions very, very strongly. And one is hope and joy, and the other one is just sadness and grief. I'm fortunate enough to be in a show right now. We actually opened June 17th and we're about to start tech. So there's this joy and excitement and gratitude about being able to perform in my art. And there's this joy and excitement about seeing allies and seeing people ask questions and learn about, these issues that we've talked about for so long that are still here, right? And then there's this sadness of knowing that, COVID is still happening, and the protests in the crowds is really risking some health communities, but also being like grieving and still being hopeful in that revolution. It's a really weird, nostalgic, divided kind of piece. And I'm a crier too, Aya. So it's like crying one minute and then just like super excited and pumped the next. So yeah, that's kind of how I've been feeling lately.
Yeah.
Not to be cheesy, but I feel torn.
Yeah.
I am the mother of an almost 2-year-old. And yesterday I had the honor and privilege of speaking with some other new moms who who made some similar choices that I did. We chose to breastfeed our babies. There's an association for Black women who have chosen to breastfeed their babies, and there was this sense of camaraderie in a meetup with those women who are also raising Black and brown babies. And the world that it's an incredibly taxing physical and emotional thing to nurse a baby and to have a child and to do all of the extra things and to make such careful choices for this sweet, smart, incredibly musically talented little 1-year-old. And to know that I have to send her out into this world that's just like fragmenting around me is frightening, and it's stressful, and I'm doing everything I can to make sure that she, gets enough sleep and eats her vegetables. And I have to turn her loose into a world where they're burning in the streets, where they're looting and pillaging, where people who look like her are being shot down for apparently no reason, or they're being shot down because of the color of their skin. And that just makes my heart so heavy. It makes me ache, and it makes me sort of wonder what's it all for. But then on the other hand, it makes me even more determined that she's going to be the smartest and the strongest and the most musically talented, and she's going to have every opportunity that I can provide for her. And I'm torn between these two worlds, and right now my daughter is at the forefront of my brain and at the forefront of how I'm functioning these days, because I've just had to totally remove myself from it to even be able to cope. I have to think about her, and I have to think about my family and her future, and what I want to see be available for her in the future.
I feel torn in a different way, just as a mom. I feel a responsibility right now. I am learning. Like, I feel like I have learned so much in the past year, actually, truthfully, from good theater, from seeing Blood at the Root and seeing Scottsboro Boys and things that changed my paradigm as an old white lady. And I learned stuff that I should have known, but that I didn't. And that has been encouraging. And through this, I have learned more, and I feel like I'm doing everything that I can. I can't undo who I am, and I'm trying to just know more, because I have 3 kids and one is 17. And so trying to navigate what this is what we talk about all day long, and trying to raise them to be better and to be smarter is a challenge every day. And some days I feel like that's all we do in my house is argue about politics and things. But that's okay, because it's messy and family is messy, and I'd rather us talk about it right now. But there's a weight, Yeah.
Brian?
Yeah, I'm angry. I say that, I was sitting here thinking about it, but I need to say that because it's been this sort of most pervasive thing that I've felt for the past week and a half, and I am slow to anger. I'm a serene individual most of the time, and I haven't been. Now the source of that anger keeps like flowing from source to source to source. A lot of it is just anger at why I'm just now getting angry, or why, or just at everything that I'm seeing, the fact that I can't figure it out, the fact that that I can't intellectualize this into a place of reason, and that makes me angry, and it also makes me angry just to see obstinance and willful ignorance, and and I think this, Kenneth said it, this didn't start 2 weeks ago, and but it has this movement, this my anger really did. Like this started 2 weeks ago. Um, and so yeah, uh, but I will say that uh, I always have a bit of hope for the future. I mean, I always do. But I think part of what I think of the reasoning of this moment is that for me, I was just like, well, I've been cooped up for 2 months, by myself in a house. Like there's a part of that I'm sure is why, like, it's easier to feel like I can go out into the streets now, and because I kind of want to get out of my house, but as a nation, as a race, as a human race, we've all been cooped up for 2.5 months, and in some ways living on the edge a little bit emotionally and spiritually, and it doesn't surprise me that that an event as horrific as this is, though it's not the first by any means, it doesn't surprise me that that's the kind of thing that would tip folks over the edge. Um, but I'm still working out where this anger I've got right now, and this action, and this motivation that I feel, where it's been all my life. Um, yeah, that's where I'm at.
The slow to anger, I relate to that because I find myself like Shonda. I find myself, and if you follow my posts, you've seen I'll say I've started and discarded several posts, and it's because I don't want to put myself out there right now because. And I'll say it on this screen. I just don't feel like having the FBI coming to my door. Like that's the type of angry I am, because whatever I say, FBI is going to be at my door. So but that slow to anger, I realize that I'm angry. I realize that. So I'm doing my best to not push it on the world just yet.
Maybe I'm wrong, Aya, but it also feels like I am guarding what I say and do and post, and what I like and what I love and what I comment. I'm guarding very carefully those things because I feel like as a Black woman, I'm being scrutinized by some of my non-Black counterparts, some of my friends, and some of my acquaintances, and some of the people in the world that I know of. And I am trying not to do something in a moment of anger or in a moment of this righteous indignation that will have or carry some sort of a negative impact later on. And there will be a lot of people who are like, well, right is right and wrong is wrong, and you got to just speak your mind and say what you feel and this, that, and the other. But the reality is, I have a responsible job.
Yeah.
And the reality is, I want to continue to work in the theater. And the reality is, there are some things that, like you said, will send the FBI to your door because Alexa hears you and she's telling the people what you said in your house. But I find myself being very, very cautious like you. And I'm writing it, deleting it, and I'm like, okay, well, let me start it in a note on my phone before that I can copy and paste it if that's really what I want to say. So I definitely identify with you there.
Yeah. Anyone else before we go on?
I want to sort of piggyback off of what Shonda and Aya were saying about filtering or editing what we post on social media. I've been having these conversations with my friends all the time, specifically when it comes to what's happening in the theater community, Broadway. We're seeing a lot of our peers call out people who have wronged them in the past. And I myself was struggling sharing a story because the people who I would call out are still my Facebook friends. Like me, they're coming up in the business and trying to make names for themselves. And when I took this situation to my mother, she asked me, okay, so then what is your intent in telling the story? Is it just to call them out? What is your intent behind speaking out? Is it just to speak out, to say this happened to me too? What's the intent? And then she took it a little further. There was a post that I shared, it's still up on my Facebook page, it's an article that asks, where do Confederate statues go to die, or something like that. And I said, I said, at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, all right, all right.
That's good. Some of you will catch that tomorrow. That's good, sir.
And a lot of the people that were white that responded, they said, no, you should melt them down and make art, or no, they should go in a museum. And then in response, I posted a video from the film Amistad. If you know the movie, you know what scene I'm talking about. And then I said again, at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. And so then my mom goes, so then why did you say that? Was it to shut them up, or what was your true intent behind that? I said, well, my intent was to teach. So she goes, so if your intent is to teach, which is something I said, I'm tired of doing, I'm tired of teaching. It's too much. So if your intent is to teach, then that's where you have to start from. Because I think a lot of people are just spitting fire out of emotion right now. And we are at a place now where we need to come together and start having conversations. And if it is, and I say this very heavily because I'm tired of it, if it is the Black community teaching, that's just where we are at this moment. I think we have to be clear on intent in sharing a post, and intent on speaking up when choosing the battles. What is the clear intent?
One of the
Yeah,
questions. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, there's a difference in teaching and preaching, right?
Yes. I've heard that many a time on the pulpit. Stop preaching, let me teach for a moment.
Right.
So we have a question. How do you cope or move through anger with something that has already been known? How do you cope or move through anger with something that has already been known?
I feel like I'm talking a lot. I'm sorry.
Oh,
Nope.
yeah.
I'll give someone else. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess this is a kind of a transition point from the last conversation about social media and what we're preaching or teaching and posting. But my go-to as a performing artist, in addition to like all of the theater and singing that I do, poetry is the one thing that I keep for myself. And that's my one art where I kind of keep it for myself, and that's how I'm able to stay centered as an artist. And some poetry that I wrote years ago, back during the 2016 election, and all of my, high school experiences and stuff, like all of that I had written down in poetry. And the one post that I typed out, copy pasted, deleted, didn't post, was a poem from about like 3 or 4 years ago. Just basically saying, I'm hoarse from screaming, I am numb from grieving, and I'm scavenging every day for a trace or semblance of hope. And like, that's where I go to as an artist, because, I can do no wrong when I'm writing. And I can do no wrong and just be my authentic self and say what I'm honestly feeling. So that's one way that I've been coping. Also, personally, I'm an introvert. I don't really like crowds. I really liked during quarantine when all of the streets were empty and there was no traffic. That was my best time. So I'm a little bit sad that the hustle and bustle of the city is going to come back. But yeah, that's really how I've personally been coping. I don't know if anybody else resonates with that, but That's kind of my method for dealing with it, and relying on support systems, of course.
I think you can sort of think of anger like a matchstick. It's on fire and it's gonna burn, but it's gonna burn to the bottom. And when there's nothing left, it's gonna burn out. And so I think also what has bubbled up for me, my Christian teachings keep coming, they bubble up in my spirit. The Bible says, be angry and sin not. You can feel what you feel. And I think that we have to give ourselves permission to be angry. It's okay. And I think that the sin not part comes in editing that post and revising it and like taking that deep breath at the grocery store when that person cuts you off one more time and you're like, I know you see me standing here. I know you see me standing here. I'm practicing my social distancing by staying 6 feet back from the next person in line. That doesn't mean that I'm not here. That doesn't mean you just sweep your cart in. Like, can you
Did
tell
this happen recently, Shonda?
what's been going on in my life? But I think that we've been acculturated to not be angry and to sweep that aside as a negative emotion. And I don't think that that's the correct way to approach it. I think we have to be allowed to feel what we feel. And if that's anger, that's anger. We can be angry, but acting on it is a very different story. And so I think we need to just sort of recognize where that fine line is and feel our feelings without imposing them on other people and without acting in a way that's going to be hurtful or damaging or make the situation worse than it already is. Because it's going to burn out like that match. You're going to come to the place where, like, that anger is going to subside and you'll be able to think clearly through what the next step is. And I think that probably is where the nation is right now. Like the nation is that matchstick on fire. We're burning. It's on fire. It's hot. And it's getting closer and closer and closer to the fingertips. But eventually that anger is going to burn out and we'll be able to move forward with something that makes sense.
Makes sense.
More clear-headed.
I think so. One of the things I've been thinking about in my anger is the fact that part of my whiteness is that I'm not used to suffering. I don't have the practice for this kind of anger, and white people don't. So the white people that I see speaking out right now, and I keep seeing that, like, most of these, in these protests and everything, most people you're seeing are white, and I think part of the discontent I'm seeing, and also a lot of the the noise that's coming from both sides, which I think is not helpful, the kind of reductive noise where we're like, just reducing the entire thing down to a meme or just to one thing, is because, at least for me, I just am not practiced at this kind of anger, and I'm not practiced at suffering. And that's part of the uncomfortableness that white people, we have to reckon with, is that we need to start being okay with some suffering and being uncomfortable, and just move forward. And the other thing I'll say about it too, for me, and this is the lesson I've learned in lots of different places, but is to ask why 5 times. If I'm talking about my anger, I need to say, why am I angry? Am I angry because of that woman's post? No. I'm angry because what she posted about. Am I really angry about that? No, I'm angry actually at the system, or you know what I mean, and get so that I can kick it up 10,000 feet and diffuse it. So at least it's not myopically, focused on this one meme that is so stupid, that just lights that match, right? But I am worried, curious about what you said, Shonda, about it burning out, because I do not want to lose momentum now that things have been exposed, and sunlight is good for the soul, and there's a massive gaping wound in this country that is exposed right now, and I don't want to go to some shoddy doctor to sew it up. I want to like look at it, figure out what's wrong, and get the right treatment. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a fairness in this country that's been lacking for decades. And we've all put up with it, you know. I know that I tell my students sometimes, you know, I say, you know, sometimes you need to choose when to speak and when not to speak. Because when you're not speaking, you're listening. And you can really hear what's going on. And people will tell you anything. Well, this job is not good for you, but yeah, I applied for it. Why aren't you considering me? Don't be trying to tell me what I want, you know. And we've gone through this so many times. You go to get an apartment, and now all of a sudden it's not available, but you got the money and the finances to. So this country, this has brought something back to the forefront to everybody that has to deal with it. And I'm so glad this has happened. And I because we're all people. The fact that most African Americans are mixed with European. I know my grandmother is blue-eyed blonde. You know, we are all mixed, so we're one race. And for us to choose sides of you know, red versus blue versus yellow versus brown, it's just not right. And I'm just glad that we're finally taking a look at it, and hopefully we'll be looking back at this in 5 years and say, wow, that was a moment. 2020 was when things changed.
When we were able to see 2020. Yeah. David, did you have a comment that you wanted to express?
I'm good.
Okay. I think one of the things that I noticed in that question was that has already been known. And I've been in a place myself where I'm still going through it, but going through this hardship, this struggle, and going at it alone. And I will never forget that there was so much anger and pain and hurt that sometimes I didn't even want to recognize or look at. And it was, you know, something that was coming or being oppressed or put on me. And one of the things that happened is another person was starting to experience the same thing. And for some reason, the fact that one person was starting to experience the same thing, my anger, my pain, all of that somehow shifted its burden. It was like we were sharing that burden. And then Shonda knows, she was there. We won't talk about it specifically, but there was a moment where, you know, there was a little bit of justice. And I just cried and cried and cried because all of that pain and hurt and being weighed down, not all of it, but some of it was able to subside in that one little piece of somebody recognizing, oh yeah, you are going through something. And so I would say that to cope and to move through that anger, it for me has been seeing the people on the streets. And not just people that look like me, I mean everybody. And I'm not sure if, you know, it was, if the video, like, I don't know, you never know how these videos go, but I mean, the Amish people, they came out, y'all. And I was just like, and somebody commented, how did they even know this was going on? And so, I mean, even that to me was just like, oh, okay. Ooh, okay, I'm not alone in this. And back to what Kenda said, like, there's some hope because there are other people out there doing this thing. So thank you so much for that. Well, I'm gonna skip to another question because it was brought up. Um, this notion of race. When I was small, I don't know how young I was, but I was told, and I feel like it was in a public setting, but it doesn't make sense that it was, that race was a man-made thing. It was a man-made conception. And for me, I was like, well, then it must have been an evil man. And the good man acknowledged and celebrated ethnicity and culture. And so I want to ask the panel, is race man-made?
So I don't know if a few years back, I had the privilege of working with the Museum of Natural Sciences when they brought the exhibit on race to Raleigh. And going to that exhibit would have been one thing. It would have been eye-opening on one level. But I also got the chance to be trained to hold space in what we called circle keeping. And that meant that we had some extra resources and we were trained in how to talk to people and hold space for people who had just been through that exhibit, because we realized and recognized that unloading that kind of information on people and then letting them waltz away into the streets was not going to have the impact that we needed it to have. And that exhibit broke down scientifically how race is a man-made construct. There are not races. We have different levels of pigmentation. We have different physical attributes and features because of where we live geographically and what our bodies needed. We have different cultures. We have different nationalities, but we do not have separate races. Unloading that kind of information on some of our friends here in the Deep South could have potentially gone a couple different ways. So they brought together very intentionally a tremendous group of people, and many of them that I met for the first time there, and I am still friends with. We still communicate, we still talk. It, it, it was really important that they had a trained group of individuals who could say, okay, everybody's done, great, come this way, have a seat in these chairs. We're going to sit down. Here's your talking piece. These are the rules. And we're going to sit for an hour and just unpack everything that you have learned and unlearned since walking through those doors. And I just feel like there's got to be some way of expressing or relating that information to a wider audience. Everybody needs to see and get that information, because it's tremendous how it changes people when you really understand that this is a thing that people made up to keep other people in their place. That was the whole point, to make money off of people for free labor, to divide classes. That was the intention behind it. When people understand that from a scientific standpoint, it's not just an opinion, it's not just what somebody feels or dreamt up. They have the factual evidence, and they also talk about some of the impacts that dividing people and creating this notion of race has had over the years. It was a tremendous exhibit. It is a phenomenal experience, and it's one that more people need to have, especially in this time period we're living in.
I agree, and you know, if I had an ounce of trust in the company, I would say, can we just get everybody a 23andMe for free? Because you look at what happens and where your DNA is and where you go back to, it just bears that out. It's just factual evidence. I wish I had more faith in people to believe facts but I'm seeing that that's not even one of the things that, you know, is working right now. But I'll speak to it as part of like my growth and my thinking on it too, you know, and I've tracked sort of my relationship with race and race relations, and growing up in the 90s, and when the catchphrase was colorblind, and that's what everybody believed was great, and I was like, yeah, that's it, we got it done, figured it out. And obviously it, like, you know, in 2020 again, hindsight's 2020, that's just ridiculous. um but now, like, the most recent one, that's just sort of another one of those dumb moments that smacked me over the head, was always believing that, you know, people aren't born racist, people are taught to be racist, people are taught to hate. Well, no, no one is born racist. One, race doesn't exist. Two, what they're taught is hate. But every single person, no one is exempt from being born into systematic racism, into a systematic, a system that has been built over centuries and centuries and centuries, that favors a particular pigment, you know. And so you, no one can, and so that's one of the things, one of the arguments that I think is actually not terribly helpful, is when we reduce this down to like, you are a racist, you are not a racist, you're being racist, you're not being racist, you know, like, you know, what are you actually doing? Are you furthering the the suppression of a whole group of people? That's what it is that you're doing, you know. um so yeah, I think that's another sort of like step forward. In 20 years from now, we're going to find out other stuff to be like, you know, that we're thinking right now that you know, um that is just as insensitive. But you know, and but if that's the case, you know, so if race doesn't exist, um is that's, what are we changing this to? I will say that um one of the things just practically I've noticed is that people are much more comfortable saying black than they were before, and using that term. And I know that some people identify, and I've heard it in the conversation before, of whether, you know, you identify as African American or whatever, but I'm hearing black. And and the one thing is that I think that it's helpful to be a unifying voice and to say it like that. And so that's one of the things that is emboldening, I think, to this whole, to the movement right now. um but if race doesn't exist, and it doesn't, then how are we eventually going to change how we talk about, you know, racial negativity, which is the name of the, you know, the panel.
I think one thing that, and you use the word unlearn, Shonda, in talking about the exhibit that, and you know, Brian, you have those moments of what was I thinking in the 90s? That's kind of my entire 90s, but I think we're also going to have to give people grace that we don't want to give, in the sense that Black Americans have been dealing with this and dealing with this. You know, I you know, talk about my kids. We talk about this all the time. They don't understand as teenagers that the world existed before they were born, right? And which is just part of being a young person. And so they can say, I'm not racist, but they don't understand the systemic part necessarily. And so we're working, and we as adults and as white adults, I think, that are hearing things and learning things and unlearning things for the first time now, we're going to have some space to learn. And that is what I think is going to be hard, because I want to believe that I'm smarter at math now than I was 40 years ago. Please, Lord.
Unless it's that new math.
I know, which
Mhm.
I'm not interested in at all. So, you know, it's a matter of, we still have to figure out how much time we want to give people to figure stuff out. But if I'm sick and tired, I don't want to give anybody time to do anything. You know, I get that. And so I don't know what that balance is. I can ask for grace, and I can ask for time to learn and to teach my kids better and all of those things. But I get that it's already been way too long.
You know,
Yeah.
I teach African American theater and African American history, and I went to an all black high school, but I did not get the history until I was in college. And no one in the United States is getting this history. That this racism is passed down from generation to generation. And when you look at, when I teach it and I show them films of the 1950s and the 1960s, when there's one man in there says, when you told something long enough, you begin to believe it. If you told you a second class citizen, and then now you teach your kids that you're a second class citizen, the whole, race begins to think you're a second class citizen when you're not. So when the United States needs to come to grip with its own history, and that's what I'm hoping that these conversations will lead to. That, wait a minute, it wasn't that long ago when we had separate colored and white restrooms. When Rosa Parks sat on the front of the bus and was arrested. When the Freedom Riders were going down to the South and were pulled off buses and beaten, and water hose poured on them and dogs sicked them, unarmed people. And now we still having unarmed blacks being killed, but nobody don't see a problem with that. If you're in custody and you don't have a weapon, how is it okay for you to get shot? It just, so I'm glad we're having this conversation. I'm sorry, I'm passionate about when I'm teaching, and I'm a passionate person, especially when I'm acting and when I'm directing. So yeah, this conversation has to get deeper, and I can understand Renee and Brian. Your points of view are excellent, and what you're saying is there's things that you need to learn about that the whole world didn't know about, and we're finally learning about these things now.
I think something else that might be helpful as we think about race, and that's the notion that everybody keeps coming back to. Well, we just said race doesn't exist, so how do we address this issue? What do we call it? I don't think that it's really race. It is delusions of superiority.
Exactly.
It's the fact that one group of people has deemed themselves better than another group of people and set up a system in which the world they live in and the world they function in will benefit them and harm others. And I think that if we can address it as an issue of superiority and of people needing to understand that we all meet together on this even keel, and then our life choices and the ways we behave, then that's when that bootstrap thing comes into play. But if I was born without boots, what do you want me to do?
Right.
And that's where Black America feels like we are.
Right.
We feel like we're standing out here barefoot in the streets, and everybody's hollering, well, you can do it too. You can make something of yourself, and you did it, and why can't you? Well, we're not starting from the same place because of the system that was built and the system that we're forced to function in. And so I think if we can reframe it, it's not about race, because race doesn't exist, into a place where we're now talking about the systematic oppression of a group of people based on nonsense.
The have-nots, right?
The haves and the have-nots. If we can reframe it, I think now we have a more clear conversation, and we're able to sit down and say, oh, well, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, Renee, you kind of mentioned earlier, being an educator, being a teacher, and having to relearn and unlearn some things. And I've been a nanny and done babysitting and all that for years. And with the families and the kids that I work with, a lot of the times I take on kind of a guardian role for the times that I'm with them, and have to go over like, okay, I know that you've been taught this. I know that this is what your parents said. I know that this is how you're feeling in school, but as your nanny, I want to talk to you about this. And I feel like I'm a lot more patient and really come from that place of like teaching, not preaching, and teaching for understanding and comprehension about, how oppression is a part of our culture, and how it is sucked into our institutions and in our government and in our systems. I have a lot more patience when I'm talking to kids about that on a very basic scale that they can understand, than when I have to talk to adults and peers and folks that are older than me about it. With kids, I'm able to say very basically, like, you know, if you wouldn't want to feel like this, then why would you treat someone else that way? But I'm able to talk to them specifically about the reasons why they think certain things are okay because of their school that they go to, because of their neighborhood, because of their swim team, you know, versus like how it was for me growing up. And I feel like, you know, kids totally know that there's a difference between people. They may not know the word race, they may not know, you know, the word internalized oppression yet, but they totally pick up on it, and they totally know at an age that not every parent really understands. And parents don't always understand the way that their parenting affects their kids. As a nanny, I try and be like that educator and that middle person and that role model for those kiddos. But I carry that into my conversations with adults, you know, coming from this place of like, you're young, you're new to the world, you don't understand yet. And with older folks, I say, you know, you're new to this social media generation, you're new to some of these topics, and it's history and it's happened before, you know, systems of oppression and systems of revolutions and revolts and riots that actually start change, you know. That's in our museums, that's in our, not always in our textbooks, but it's there. And you know, coming from that place of like, some people just don't know yet, and educating is exhausting, and it's difficult and exhausting, but that's kind of how I see the educating on racism, what it is, what it isn't, and what it means in our society, you know, where it exists and how it exists and oppresses, is really important. And I'm glad that I'm seeing some more of it in these unfortunate times.
So that brings me to a question that I was going to ask earlier, because I was interested when we talked about this last week. And we are going to get into some of the things that we discussed as far as theater is concerned. But I did want to talk and ask the panel, you know, at what age did you experience racism, or you saw it happening, like just your first experience with it, whether it was you or, you know, someone else, and at what age? Because I think that was one of the things that we discussed last week was, you know, well, what age should you start talking to children about racism, or delusions of superiority? I love that. So, you know, that's a question for the panel.
I was taught at a very early age about racism and what my role was perceived as a Black man in America. I had very strong parents who wanted to and did raise a very strong Black young man. So they made me aware of the world at a very young age, how to react to police officers that pulled over, the importance of articulating. And I didn't experience racism towards me personally until my freshman year of college. Hello. When my roommate and I did not get along, and his father said the N-word in my presence and said, well, you know, that's just how they act. And that was the first time I experienced anything like that. And I was 18 when I experienced that. So my entire life I was told, be mindful, be watchful of these things. And I was 18 when it actually happened to me personally.
I think I was 18 too, but it was when you're out there working, that's when you really find out, you know, when something happens and then you try to speak up for yourself. and then people don't want to listen to you, and then your voice raises, and the first thing they say, that's why I can't talk to you, because see, you getting all upset. So we get this theme, but wait a minute, what we're talking about never gets addressed, because now we're talking about my voice. So that's when I think was the first time out in a work situation for me.
So I've told the story before. I was in kindergarten, and we had the monkey bars, and the girls were all playing this wonderful game where you jump up and you hook your legs on backwards like the gymnast, and you swing, and you do this thing called a penny drop, where like you flip yourself over that somersault and then you land. And when they landed, I grew up in Florida. We don't have regular dirt, we have sand. And so when you land, your feet, the impact makes this glorious shower of sand like fly up in the air, and it all comes like raining back down. And I was all excited, and all the girls were lined up, and I got on and I did it, and I flipped and I landed, and the sand flew up. And just as it was about to come down, I thought to myself, you are going to get beat so bad when you get home with this sand in your hair. And it didn't dawn on me until that moment. I looked at all the other girls, and they were all blonde, blue-eyed, with their cute little knockers and their pigtails. And there were no other Black girls in that line to play that game. They all knew better. They all knew better. I was the one who hadn't put together yet that you can't do what the other little girls are doing, because the process is totally different when it comes time for the results. The consequences for you are different than they are for those other little girls. And I kind of looked over my shoulder, and there were some other Black girls, and they were looking like, you gonna get it? And sure enough, I went home and I cried, not only because I had to get my hair washed and pressed and greased and back in those, and the hot comb came out, and it was a bad situation, and it all had to happen before bedtime, so I would be ready for school the next morning. But it occurred to me, and that's why I was really crying. I wasn't really crying because of the hair situation, which was bad, but I was crying because I had suddenly realized that I was different. I was not like the little girls that I wanted to be like, or that I wanted to play with, maybe is a better way to put that. We were different, and I was going to have to figure some things out quickly if I wanted to run and play, and if I wanted to play in the sand box, and if I wanted to do this and that and the other. If I wanted to do those things, I was going to have to figure out a different approach because of the consequences. And I grew up, my parents involved me in all kinds of activities around my culture. I was a McKnight Achiever, and that was for high achieving Black students. And they had me in dance lessons with other children who looked like me. I got to participate in lots of things. I was in Jack and Jill of America, and I was around my cohorts, and I was with other Black children, and I was always aware of my Blackness in terms of the culture. And those groups and organizations touched on, the struggle. And we learned about Rosa Parks and the civil rights movement and where we came from and up from slavery and Eyes on the Prize. We learned about those things and we were exposed. But it wasn't until high school when the impacts of it really started to show up in my life. The fact that I was Black and that mattered showed up in my life in terms of like positions that I didn't get and elections I didn't win and roles that I didn't get to play and those kinds of things started to show up in my life in high school. And so there was a gap where I had realized that I was Black and that was not the same as some of my counterparts, and the point where I began to understand that could possibly have some negative impacts on my life. There was a little time phase in between those 2 points. And so being older and recognizing and realizing where different things sort of happened along the way, sort of informs what I do and how I teach, because I have high school students and I can sort of see through a different lens where the light bulbs are starting to to come on, and where certain things are starting to happen in their lives, and how I can coach some of those kids through what they're experiencing. And I wasn't able to name it until later, but like, you know, I'm in a position now where I can help somebody else's kid figure it out.
Anyone else? Okay. So one of the things that you said, Shonda, was, you know, those parts that you, those roles and those parts that you could not get. And so that's one of the things that we're gonna dive into now is the current state with racism. Well, we can talk about racism in theater. Our current state is, you know, Blacks in theater. So some of us may have, this is a question from last week, excuse me. Griffin Matthews had posted a video in response to his work that was that he wrote, and had other directors and producers and persons and different people, you know, kind of take over for him. And he expressed his that whole process and things that he felt like he could not say before. He felt like it was now is the time for me to let you know what I went through. And someone asked, well, do we have that sense of, or is that, do we get that sense here in our local community? And then, oh, I feel so bad. For those that are on my watch party, I'm about to swipe up because I do want to take the time to read some, a letter that was written. And it was along the same lines as what Matthews had talked about. I am going to read it quickly because our time, I don't know how much time we can request more, but our time is running low. If we can get more, that's fine. If not, so I'm going to read it fast, but please, when you get a chance, if you have not read this letter, do take the time to actually sit and read it and ponder on it. And it was called Dear White American Theater. And so again, some of the things that are in this letter are some of the things that Matthews had in his video. We come together as a community of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, theater makers in the legacy of August Wilson's The Ground on Which I Stand, to let you know exactly what ground we stand on in the wake of our nation's civic unrest. We see you, we have always seen you, we have watched you pretend not to see us. We have watched you unchallenge your white privilege, inviting us to traffic in the very racism and patriarchy that festers in our bodies while we protest against it on your stages. We see you. We have watched you program play after play, written, directed, cast, choreographed, designed, acted, dramaturged, and produced by your rosters of white theater makers for white audiences, while neglecting a token, if any, I need glasses, I'm getting old, while relegating a token, if any, slot for Black, Indigenous, people of color play. We see you. We have watched you amplify your voices when we are heralded by the press but refuse to defend our aesthetic when we are not, allowing our livelihoods to be destroyed by a monolithic and racist critical culture. We see you. We have watched you inadequately compare us to each other, allowing the failure of entire productions to be attributed to decision you forced upon us for the comfort of your theater's white patrons. Meanwhile, you continue to deprioritize the broadening of your audiences by building no relationship with our communities. We see you. We have watched you harm your Black, Indigenous, people of color staff members, asking us to do your emotional labor by writing your equity, diversity, and inclusion statements. When we demanded you live up to your own creeds, you cowered behind old racist laments of feeling threatened, and then discarded us along with the value you claim to uphold. We see you. We have watched you discredit the contributions of Black, Indigenous, people of color theaters only to co-opt and annex our work, our scholars, our talent, and our funding. We see you. We have watched you turn a blind eye as unions refuse to confront their racism and integrate their ranks, muting the authenticity of our culture and only reserving space for us to shine out front on your stages, but never behind them. We see you. We have watched you dangle your opportunities like carrots before emerging. BIPOC artists using the power of development, production, and awards to quiet us into obedience at the expense of our art and integrity. We see you. We have watched you use our BIPOC faces on your brochures, asking us to politely shuffle at your galas, talkbacks, panels, board meetings, and donor dinners in a room full of white faces without being willing to defend the sanctity of our bodies beyond the stages you make us jump through the hoops to be considered for. We see you. We have watched you hustle for local, federal, foundation, and private funding on our backs, only to redirect the funds into general operating accounts to cover your deficits from years of fiscal mismanagement. We see you. We have watched you hire the first BIPOC artist in executive leadership only to undermine our innovations and vision of creating equitable institutions by suffocating our efforts with your fear, inadequacy, and mediocrity. We see you. We have watched you attend one Undoing Racism workshop, one espousing to funders you are doing the work without any changes to your programming or leadership. You've been unwilling to even say the words anti-racism to your boards out of fear of them divesting from your institutions, prioritizing their privilege over our safety. We see you. We have watched you promote anti-Blackness again and again. We see you. We have watched you say things like, I may be white, but I'm a woman, or I may be white, but I'm gay, as if oppression isn't multi-layered. We see you. We have watched you exploit us, shame us, diminish us, and exclude us. We see you. We have always seen you. And now you will see us. We stand on this ground as BIPOC theater makers, multi-generational, at various stages in our careers, but fiercely in love with the theater. Too much to continue is under abuse. We will wrap the least privileged among us in protection and fearlessly share our many truths about theaters, executive leaders, critics, casting directors, agents, unions, commercial producers, universities, and training programs. You are all a part of this house of cards built on white fragility and supremacy. And this is a house that will not stand. This ends today. We are about to introduce you to yourself. Sign the ground we stand on. So thank you so much for listening to that. And that's a lot. And there are some things I want to point out that we had talked about last week. But one of the general questions that was asked last week was, do we get a sense that that is here in our local community? And I did want to bring that question back up today.
I think yes. I mean, like I think it's undeniable I don't think anybody that can read that or listen to it who works even moderately in the theater around here and not have it sting a little bit and recognize I mean, every single point that was made there, I feel like I could give you an example. And I haven't worked outside of North Carolina in 10 years, outside of the Triangle. Um, yeah, absolutely.
My feeling is that what happens in the nation trickles down as far as theater and as far as the arts, because so many organizations look to national theater organizations for to follow their lead. They look to them as an example. They look to them as a standard. And if it's happening there, you have to believe that it's also happening here. Um, I have personal experiences with a number of things on that list, and they don't feel good. It doesn't feel good um, when you hear something from somewhere else and you go, yep, 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 that one too. When you're going down the list and checking it off, and you realize that you may have wanted to believe that you were in a better position because it's small here and we're insulated, and we are um, we are oriented to help each other, and we are oriented to create a space of belonging, and you sort of want to believe that this big bad monster is living somewhere else, that where you are is not part of that. But when you really sit and listen to the items on the list, and you're able, like Brian said, to go down that list and identify those items, you can't help but be taken aback by that. Um, and so to answer it succinctly and briefly, yes, is the answer. I do believe that we are living under similar, if not exactly the same circumstances here in North Carolina.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I want to
I've been,
say,
let me just say this.
okay.
I've been directing for 20 years. And I started my own production company, Agape Theater Project, because I got frustrated because I applied to direct some shows, some Black shows in white theaters, and white directors were chosen over me to direct a Black show. Um, what's wrong with my credentials? You know what I'm saying? Uh, but as Aya was saying earlier, I didn't let it, but I channeled my energy into directing what I want to direct, and now I can do that, and I hire directors to direct. I'm a happy camper, but it hurts. It hurts. It really does, because when I go to other plays, I felt like I could direct them better than what I'm seeing. And, you know, here I have a degree in this and I've been in it for 20 years and my work is not good enough. It got to be something else. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, we all experience that. Um, and I just mentioned this. I did a play last summer called Trouble in Mind. And if you ever get a chance to read that play, it's about a white cast and a Black cast coming together to do a play, and they get to arguing because of the script. It's so hilarious because there is one scene, and I'll be brief, when Luelletta tries to convince the white director that she would not, as an African American woman, would not send her child out to be lynched. And they kept saying, well, there's something in the script that says there's a lesson that will be learned that lynching is wrong. No, but she kept saying, but would you send your child out? And finally, in the height of the play, he says, your child has nothing in common with my child. Not a thing. And the whole theater hits a silence because the racism finally comes out in that piece. I wish all y'all could see that. I might do it again soon. But anyway, I was in the show too. I played Sheldon. I'm sorry, Natalia. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was a commenter and a viewer for the last Torn episode for RDU on Stage, and I was typing away and writing things, and you know, I kind of mentioned that to Aya before this because I am an ethnically ambiguous woman of color performing in the Triangle area, and I've experienced it. And I had one, I told you I was going to get on a soapbox, and I may drag a couple people, not by name though, but I had one particular director who I had auditioned for in the summer when I had spent the whole summer walking dogs, was out at the pool, tanning every single day. And I was really well tanned. And then by the time the show came around, it had been winter. I had been stuck inside. I lost some pigmentation in my skin, but I'm still a woman of color. And with me not being tanned and under bright stage lights and an audience member, you know, hundreds of feet away, under stage lights, I was white passing, right? And comments from directors about not being dark enough to kind of meet that diversity mark in their cast, or being ethnically ambiguous, being Hispanic, Asian, and Jamaican, and not fitting into any of those boxes. I just want to say, like, for any company or director or member in leadership at a theater, particularly in the Triangle, who doesn't think that this is an issue, or whoever is asking the question, you know, do we have this in our theater community? I want to say I've experienced that as like a lighter skinned woman of color. So if I've experienced it, imagine what Chandra and Aya have experienced, you know? So yeah, I'm gonna get on a soapbox again later, but I'm gonna just drink my water for now, and Aya, you could mute me.
One thing I wanted to say real quick about something that Kenneth said that's not even listed here, but you know, Kenneth talked about, you know, directing at a Black theater. Just the fact that the existence of a Black theater has to happen implies that the other theaters are white theaters, and nobody ever says white theaters except you, Kenneth, right? But that's the truth. You're not going to have a Black theater unless there's a need for one, and the need for one means that these are white theaters over here, and call it what it is. That's what it is. If you're not being served here, you're going to go over here and create a place where you can do that. So that's what we have. We have white theaters, and then we have Black theaters because they aren't being served in the theaters that are espousing to be serving the entire community.
I just want to say thank you for, I mean, I have, you know, the first time I read that, it stuck in my gut in all the ways that it was supposed to. And it was really helpful. And thank you for your honesty, Natalia. Noted. And that's all I can say. But thank you. And I'm sorry, because it shouldn't happen.
I'm sorry for everyone too.
I'm not from the Triangle area, but I believe the issues that the artists of color, I think that the issues that they've experienced in the Triangle are universal for artists of color across the nation, from Broadway to Chicago to Phoenix or wherever theater is being done. And the issue, one of the major issues, and Broadway is right now, put spotlight on Broadway. Everyone who's in a Broadway show is sort of scratching their heads as to what they want to do, because they've realized one of their biggest producers, one of their biggest theater owners, is a huge Trump supporter, you know, and I think, not that we're surprised, it's just now we have confirmation. And I think that's the issue across the board. We have a lot of white theaters where we are now realizing, and that our intuitions are correct, that the people with the money who are controlling everything, who are making the decisions, are voting for the other side. And it makes it difficult as an artist of color to want to trust the place that I'm in if I know that you've only hired me to entertain your white audiences, and after I leave this space, I'm just another Black body. Um, and that's I think one of the major issues as a community will have to tackle when things get back up and running for real. We're seeing artists on Broadway saying, I'm not coming back to Broadway. You're not going to use my services anymore, which is kind of, it's realistic, but kind of unrealistic because some people are just making their Broadway debuts like, this is my dream, and I'm torn because now I know the Nederlanders are voting against my brother or me. You know, I'm just a dollar sign to them, but I'm an artist and I feel so many feelings. I don't know what to do. You know, so as artists, we're all torn right now, and it's sad that these white theaters are just now wanting, at least here in Chicago. I don't I don't know entirely what the community is like right now in the Triangle, but here in Chicago, we're having white theaters who are using their social media platforms now to highlight Black theaters, and it's like, what was wrong with them before that you don't highlight them before? You know, what was wrong? What was wrong with the shows that they're producing? Like, oh, we donated. Where were your donations before? And now you want to come to the table again. It's getting back to what was the term we called the people who are too tired? We're just like, well, girl, please, where's your money before? You know.
I think that's an issue that we cannot untangle from the other parts of this puzzle. The economics matter. The money and where it comes from and how you get it and how hard it is to get it and who gets it and who doesn't get it and how it's used. The money questions are a huge part of this puzzle. And until we can reconstruct what it looks like, because those Nederlander theaters are $1 industries all on their own. Like they have their own little universe they print their own money. It's ridiculous how much money circulates through just the Nederlander organization, and that's why they have such stringent rules about where their shows tour and how those tours are built and how those are put together. They have the economics to make the rules. They hold the power because they hold the money. And until some of our Black theaters are given the same economic power to produce high quality work, it won't ever be seen as equal. I really admire the work that Ken Hinton does because he always pulls something out of an anthology that I covered at my HBC. I attended Tennessee State University. What's up, my Tigers? Hey, big blue Tigers. And I was a theater major there, and thank God for it because I was exposed to a totally different canon than some other people. I was trained to sing classically, and I was trained in Shakespeare, and I was trained in all of the Greek tragedies. I read and digested and performed in some of those, but I also got the Black Power. I also got Amiri Baraka. I got like juicy stuff too. So sometimes Ken Hinton will pull a script and I'll see that he's doing something that I read a scene from or covered at my Black institution. And I get all excited and other people have never ever heard of it. Other people have never ever seen it. They are like, I might. I'm like, no. You don't understand. It's a really, really great show. You got to go support. You got to go see it. You got to go, be exposed to this piece and to this work. And I think that it's because there hasn't been a national tour of that show because nobody would get behind it economically. Nobody would put the money in that show to see it tour nationally with a well-known cast. Those are some of the things that I think we've got to address the economic issue in the arts across the board, because if white theaters can can take on the risk of performing work that reflects the communities that they're in, work that reflects people of color across the board, indigenous people, I think that they will have a different understanding of what that work is. They won't be afraid to do it because the backing financially is there. They're not going to tank on it, and it won't ruin their numbers for the year.
So I was gonna ask about that specifically, like in our community. I mean, everyone is aware that, there's a checkbox in order for you to get funds. And one of those check boxes is the percentage. And does your percentage of what we're seeing in your theater match that of the demographics that we have in the area? And if anybody thinks that's a secret, it's public information. But so people that are, the directors and the people that are applying for these grants, one of the questions that I thought about, and it's also public, that I've been on one of those panels, and one of the things that dug into me is there were theaters that were very adamant about, see, we got it. So give us the money for that because we got it. We checked it off. This is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to do so that we can check this off. And this was mentioned in the letter. And the question then becomes, how can that is, and I don't know if it can be answered here, but how can that itself be structured so that it's not just a checkbox, that it's a genuine, like, okay, it has to be some qualitative measure. And I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that. Some qualitative measure other than just, I've got 2 Black shows in my season, and I got my Black lady on the board. I got, I got my Black man doing the lights today. We might not see him next week after the show. You know what I'm saying? Like, but at least we got our money. So I don't know, like, does anybody have any thoughts how to make that qualitative, like some earth under it?
I think in hearing, it's a white theater or it's a Black theater, of course, my brain is going, is our company, are we a white theater? And you can answer that. I mean, I know that when we've been asked, we've never been asked about the women, like, did we do women projects or whatever? We were never surveyed for, just taking this out of context, but there was at one point a survey about the number of women that participated in your program, and we were never asked. And I finally submitted because then it occurred to me that yes, almost everything that we did was female produced, it was female designed, it was, blah, blah, blah. And it was because it was never a question. That's just how it went. And I think if we get to a place where somebody wouldn't know if you're a white theater or a Black theater, or they wouldn't be able to identify one or the other because the leadership was completely balanced numerically, maybe that's it. Like, what does that look like? You don't have one artistic director, or that you're getting voices not just on your board from 2 people of color, but you're getting people on your board where all of your numbers are divided. And that's something that we have to do better, just our company, that we have to do better at. So I don't know.
Yeah, you have to develop a track record, and that's what Agape is doing. So I'm ready now to apply for grants after 2 successful seasons. And also, I just want to give Lauren a shout out. RD on Stage came to our plays and reviewed our play and gave us a really a more of a presence than people know. Our audiences are usually 60% African American or Black audience, and then whites come to my shows too. And we market just like everybody else. Also, Byron Woods had reviewed our shows, and Kirk reviewed our shows, and we've got very good reviews. So I'm just hoping that this will translate into us getting funded now when we apply coming this next year.
I like that. It is a good question. How do you what is the qualitative answer? And I keep wrestling with the fact that this is art, and it's subjective. And the minute you try to inject algorithms and statistics and things into it, something in my soul just like says you're going to be sucking some soul out of it, and you're going to, yeah. That being said, I think that that just bare minimum action is better than inaction. And doing something, take a step, stumble, be okay that you stumbled, and get up and do something different. I also want to go back to something that David brought up earlier on too, which is, what is your intent? Is your intent to get that grant, or is your intent to be a force for positive social change in your community? And now, have that intention, but also understand your impact is going to be it's going to be felt more than your intention. People are going to understand. People are going to feel your impact. They're not going to know your intention necessarily. So have that intent, but still, if you stumble, get back up, learn something, and do something different. So I'd be surprised if anybody here has the answer that's going to fix all of this. But for Pete's sake, try something.
Yeah.
Take some action.
Yeah, I kind of wonder, there's probably like an actual name for the paradigm, but where you make something illegal or you outlaw it, and then there's more of it, or in this case where you make it necessary for a theater to meet a certain quota in order for them to get a grant, and it actually is a disservice. I don't know if that's actually going to be the case here, and if there's a name for that paradigm, but in terms of like what is quantitative rather than qualitative when it comes to bringing diverse and interesting voices to the stage, I really think it starts speaking from an actor's perspective, really starting from the environment and the workplace environment. Hopefully a theater company has already built a safe space where actors can feel vulnerable and take creative risks, and hopefully they've also already created a company in a space where anyone can speak up if there's a safety concern, or something that has to do with the production. If there's a line in the script that is outdated and problematic, hopefully you've created a work environment that your actors and your team can address those issues, regardless of what your budget is for that year. And one thing that's kind of been sticking with me is, as an actor, you audition for a piece and you get called back and you get cast or you don't, and you can only assume so much. You can only assume, I wasn't the right puzzle piece for this because of all of these reasons, or they didn't want to go with me, or they did go with me because of this reason. You could drive yourself crazy waiting for the cast list and going through all of those what ifs. But also you go through all of those what ifs when you're trying to figure out a theater's actual intention, and if they're being genuine or not. So if you're not being genuine in your rehearsals, in the way that you're respecting and respecting your actors' time and energy and commitment, and you're not valuing them in the way that they bring something unique to the table, then I can only guess, I can only go through all of the what ifs in my head and extrapolate that maybe I was a tokenized part so that you can meet that quota. And maybe you put that disclosure in as we encourage all, we hire regardless of sexual orientation and race and all that stuff. That little paragraph that you get in the audition notice, I can only assume that was just that paragraph. And also, everyone in theater talks, everyone in theater knows everybody, and everyone talks about every show that they've been in. So as an actor, if you have a negative experience, you're going to tell your friends, and any theater company who's more interested in their bottom line and they're making a profit at the end of the year doesn't really know that actors of color talk too. And that is or that isn't why we're showing up for your auditions at the end of the season. So you could pick interesting shows and you could put that paragraph in your audition notice, but the quantitative aspect of how you're running your rehearsals, how you're treating your actors, and how you treat your actors when they bring up concerns, if you say thank you and validate them, like they're giving you a note as a director, you know, then I think that's the real quantitative things that we haven't started valuing as much.
Can we please keep in mind Black theater goers as well, Black audiences?
Right.
Because there are some negative, there are some negative things that happen in theater lobbies. There are some negative things that happen at intermission, and there are some negative things that happen after the show. There are some things that happen to Black theater patrons that we need to be cautious of as well. Just as Black bodies on stage can sort of become just that, Black bodies on stage, there's also a box for what does your audience look like? And if you're just trying to check the box off and you are, you know, turning cartwheels to get people to come to your one Black show by showing up here or showing up there, or by putting a special mailer out to a special list, and you're not reaching out to those same people when you have a Rodgers and I use Rodgers and Hammer. I understand that Rodgers and Hammerstein can be problematic in its own way. I use that simply as a touch point to say, you know, more traditional theater, musical theater, that style and flavor that has not traditionally been attributed to people of color in our aesthetic. Let's put that out there, because somebody tried to ride me about Rodgers and Hammerstein last week. I'll sing you the songbook later.
I only want to see you play Anna. That's
I'm just saying. But if you're not reaching out to your same Black audience that you reached out to get them in the seats for a Black show, your February show, whatever you're doing that once a year, if you're not reaching out to those same people to get them in the seats for the rest of the season, you've got to rethink that. You've got to rethink that, and you've got to create a place where, just like actors should feel safe in your building, and in collaboration with the staff and in collaboration with the other actors, just as you need to create a safe space for your performers, you need to do the same thing for your audiences.
Yeah.
You know, are your ushers speaking respectfully to your Black patrons? You know, and sometimes it's your other patrons that you need to be sure are like, we're all here to enjoy this show together. Let's all play nice.
You know, I have an experience as a director, and I don't know, with Trouble in Mind, there are 5 white actors and 4 Black actors. I had white actors who committed to the role, and then after they committed, they dropped out because the script was too heavy. You know, you wouldn't do that. If I committed to a role, I would never get a job in this town again if I just quit. But why did they think it was okay to quit on me like that? 3 different white actors. But God got a way of working everything out, because the actors who did do the show were fabulous. They were the right actors. That we all became family, and it was great. But it just sours me to think that you would take the role, accept the role, come to rehearsals, and now all of a sudden there's your grandmama from, you know, something's happened in your life and now you can't do the show. And I don't think that would happen at one of the major white companies in town. You would not do that. You just wouldn't do that.
Yeah, I think another, again, most of my experience is just as an actor. And so that's kind of always the lens that I look through, not as a director or anything. But, everyone starts somewhere. Everyone starts somewhere. Most everybody starts in a school or community theater setting. And for everyone knows that any performer is replaceable, right? Everyone knows somebody who could have done the role better, and everyone knows somebody who has less experience and hasn't had as many like major roles before, but could really be shaped and do that role justice. And so I think that investing in actors and investing, like seeing who the people are that a company is investing in is super important, because you can start by taking small actors, but like actors who are really new in their career, and encourage them and shape them and give them a supporting system, and a platform to stand on and share their art with, and they can make it up to be on the board of directors and in leadership and in these major, predominantly white major large theaters, and I don't think that it's a supportive community, definitely, and especially in the Triangle Theater is a supportive community. But I think that lifting up actors and giving them that space and respect is really important. And if I'm really sorry to hear that you had that, like those negative experiences with white actors, Kenneth, who dropped out of shows for whatever reason. But if an actor drops out because they don't feel safe in a working condition, if an actor decides not to work with that company again because they had negative experiences, like it's probably because that director or that production or whoever, not you, Kenneth, but like another production, wasn't supporting their actors and creating that safe space. I think that a change could be made at the larger national theater levels if we actually had that minor change in the community and regional levels of theater.
I would say one thing, because Kenneth brought it up with that situation that you talked about. We've talked a lot about what are our artistic or executive directors going to do, but as performers, we have to take some responsibility for where our role in this and where we can affect change with it too. I know that I personally, I've for the majority of my life gone after the roles that I know that I can kick butt at and or that I really want to do. But I also know that there have been times when I have done something sort of against that sort of ego mindset, and with intention being like, you know what, this is a learning experience, or this is something different that I haven't done before, and I know that I'm going to meet new people or learn something new, and that has never steered me wrong. Now I've gone into shows because it's a role I wanted to do, and it's been a terrible experience. But whenever I've sort of with intention said, I want to go learn something new, I want to go be in a different environment, then that has always really gone well. And I think that performers in this area, I mean, everybody needs to be working backstage at some point. Everybody needs to be volunteering. Right. Everybody needs to go and get get your experience back there. But I need to come to a show again. I mean, I need to go and put myself in situations that I haven't before, and put myself in spaces that I haven't been before. Just for my own knowledge. But performers have to take responsibility for where we're putting ourselves and where we're being of service, and are we being of service.
I also think, just sort of piggybacking off of what Brian said, but turning it down another corner, putting ourselves in positions we haven't been in before. I think these white theaters need to start looking at the musical theater canon differently, looking at roles differently. Just because traditionally a role is played by a white actor doesn't mean that when you decide to mount it, that role has to be white. One of my dream roles is Seymour, and in Little Shop of Horrors. And one of the theaters here recently did it, and I auditioned intentionally, singing Seymour's bit from the Meek Show and Harriet. And they didn't cast me, they went traditionally. And now that same, right, traditionally.
Traditional.
And now that same theater company's like, oh, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to change diversity. And I was like, I literally went into your audition room and spoon fed you the solution. And for whatever you like, literally was casted traditionally. So I think theaters need to start on the regional level, need to start and on Broadway. I mean, we have our first Black Glenda, but she's not even a full-time Glenda. Like, no, not taking away her accomplishment, but she's a standby. And they're like, well, we've had Black Alphabas. They've been standbys. And let's not even get into the financial aspect of what they check look like because they stand by. So don't you think you're doing something amazing? You know, that means that one audience of 1,800 people saw a Black Glenda, not 8 times a week. You know, so they need to, theaters need to start thinking about it differently. The best actor for the role should book it. Not because you have some because you've been taught that's what that role should be. You've been taught that. You need to come out of a box, step outside the box and look at it differently. And when you do cast that actor of color in the role, you need to be mindful. If I'm speaking to a white director, but also directors of color, you have to be mindful of that actor's background to see if I put a Black person in this situation that's traditionally white, how would that change the story? What can I do to accurately tell that story, to stay true to the ethnic background of the actor I've chosen to cast? So if that requires more research, boo, get on Google. About time you start Googling it differently. Talk to your dramaturg. You know, okay, I'll step off my soapbox now. I'm sorry.
We're gonna put that in a meme. Talk to your dramaturg.
T-shirt. Forget a meme. That's a t-shirt.
Yeah, that's a shirt, a hat, everything.
And one thing also, when you choose an actor of color for one of those roles, be careful that you are not throwing these little darts and microaggressions. Like, can you like jazz it up a little bit? Can you give me a little more? I'm like, it's written straight for a reason. You hired me because I could sing it straight. And then like now you want it here all of a sudden. And just because I'm Black, you would not ask a white actress to do that. To add
Give me a little juke. Give me a little juke.
Add a rhythm. You know, like even down to the costuming of like some of those roles. They want to sex it up when they give it to a Black woman, or they want it bare chested all of a sudden because it's a Black man. Like there are little things throughout the whole process when you introduce a person of color into that role that like you just have to be mindful of. And it's not that it's tricky and it's not that it's difficult. It's that you have to not think with your mind that you need to make it something else, that you need to turn it into something else. You can allow it to be true to what the role is, and you can support that actor in developing that character appropriately without just like stretching it to the ends of the earth. That's all I wanted to add.
And one more thing I want to add to that. When you are doing a historical piece, stay true to the history. I made a post on my Facebook about this exact subject, and one of the shows I brought up was Parade, where I was saying, you cannot cast a person of color in the role of Leo Frank. And someone literally had the audacity to say to me, well, what, there are Black Jews. What if Leo Frank was a Black? And so then I took the conversation to my private message and I said, first of all, Leo Frank is a historical figure. So you must, I believe, when retelling historical stories, in order to honor the story and to honor the intent in which the piece was originally created, then we must cast accordingly. Um, if the piece was originally created in a certain way, like a Hamilton, where, well, of course, we have to cast accordingly that way. But with Leo Frank, we have to honor the fact that this was a Jewish man from the North coming to the South. The story would be completely different if he was a Black Jewish man coming to the South. I said that, and the person did not understand why I was saying it wouldn't work. And I said, just imagine, instead of there being a trial, there would be no trial. If he was Black and Jewish in Marietta, Georgia. So when looking at historical pieces, we have to honor them in the way they were originally created by the composer, by the book writer, because they had a specific view of that historical piece in that storytelling. We have to be, I think, extra sensitive to pieces like that. But pieces that exist in fictional worlds. Excuse me, sorry. It's up to interpretation, unless it specifically says it in the script.
Yeah. I just want to thank all of you for this wonderful conversation. I believe a lot, well, some of us, I'll be honest, I was really nervous about this whole thing. And I promise you, I'm going to find me some chocolate chip ice cream and eat it tonight. Oh, okay. I'll, yeah. Social distance outside. I'll be outside.
Yeah.
But, one of the things that was asked real quickly, just to bring it all together, was well, it was last panel was how do we as cast and crew, you know, how do we, what do we do? How do we act? How do we or people of color, you know, non-people of color, what do we do as cast and crew? And I believe conversations like this are very important for you to get all aspects from all different people and people that look like you, so that you have an understanding of how you can be, the changes that you can make and the things that you can do in order to make our region of theater a place where everyone can feel welcomed and we can all shine on stage. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aya.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aya, for moderating this panel. And thank you, all of you, for being here and being vulnerable and expressing your feelings. I think this is hopefully how we move the needle, is having these conversations. And we're going to keep it going. Miss Shonda, you have been voluntold by Juan that you're next up to moderate. So
next.
So you'll be our moderator. And if there's people watching, people have started emailing me and messaging me that they want to sit on these panels, be part of these conversations. Just message me, and I know people. I'll hook you up. And I also want to tell you all that we have a Facebook group. We now have a torn Facebook group. There were like 12 of us last week, and then after the panel last week, now there's 109 of us on this panel, on this group chat, or this group. So it is a public Facebook group. Please join. There's plenty of reading lists, watch lists, and a lot of sharing that has happened over the last week that gets me very excited. So go to Torn. It's called Torn. I think Juan and I originally started it just so the panelists could discuss, but then last week 75 people joined after we had the first discussion. So I told Juan, I said, I guess we got people's attention. Now we have to put them to work and start educating folks. So there's a lot of resources over there. Thanks everyone for watching. I do not know too many critics of color, but I do know one in Atlanta, a colleague of mine, Calandra Smith. And she's not only a theater critic, but she's also the chairperson of our diversity and inclusion committee for the American Theater Critics Association. And she will be with me on Sunday night, and we will talk about theater criticism because that is one area where critics really screw up. So we'll have a really good conversation that night. And until then, thank you guys. Go drink some wine, go eat some chocolate chip ice cream, chocolate chip cookies, whatever, no judgment. And thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Be safe.